So my man Loma, he put me onto this guy. I asked him, is there a preacher he can refer to us for youth at Eden's Landing? And he says, yeah. So we now have him here. This is a long time after the event. I think it was back in July. We had this discussion, Loma and myself. And he's here. We've had our second night with him. And, man, he's given me heaps to think about. Last night, he started off with our personal identity. And he touched on, he came from it, he came to it from an angle I wasn't expecting. He started off with the Renaissance and not the Renaissance, the Age of Enlightenment, or the Age of Reason, where the French Revolution started. And if you have a read of that and where that all began, where the great thinkers of the time, started exploring Greek philosophy and the Gnostics and separating our spirit and our flesh, like the flesh was bad and the spirit was good and all that type of thing. And a lot of that philosophy still exists today. And he started exploring a lot of those more modern philosophers, such as Rene, Descartes, who has the great famous quote, "I think, therefore I am." And then you've got Nietzsche as well, who was another one. And we looked at that because that's a popular one that's around today. And Nietzsche came up with that tagline, "God is dead." God is dead. So we explored last night, is God dead? Is he? That's the question we looked at. And if he's dead, let's go to the mortuary and do an actual dissection to find out, if he is in fact dead, then let's find out the nature of God and work out what exactly is dead. And so he starts exploring, he starts taking us through, the whole image of God process, giving us a bit of a Bible study through Genesis and even touching on Genesis 11 and all this other gear. And you see, you're just following through. And by the end of it, you start realizing that it's not so much that God is dead, because I firmly believe and convicted that God is alive. And it's the image of God that is dead or that is dying. Now, what is the image of God? Well, for any Bible students, you'll know that when God created man, he created man in his own image. So the image of God is being distorted, or is dying. And the image of God, when he made Adam by himself, not like the other 6 days, the other 5 days, every time God had finished creation, he said, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good. And on day number 6, he creates Adam, but then he says, it is not good for man to be alone. It wasn't until he made Eve that he could finally say, it is very good. And this gives us an insight into what the image of God is. The image of God is a community. It's relationships. It's what defines many minds, but moving in one direction, or moving as one. And that's what's being distorted today. Because in any case, because when he starts breaking it down, I know what he's on about. I know what he's on about. I'll put a video up, but he starts talking about consumerism, and it's consumerism that's starting to eat up the image of God. And where this basically leads to, without him having to say it, because this guy, man, he's like a skillful boxer, or like I told my friend, I said he's like a samurai, man. He dances with you and takes you on this little journey, because you're not sure where he's going, and then as you start getting into the heat of the battle, you start sensing that death strike is coming. And just when you think you know what it is, he brings you something else, and it's like, wow, man, didn't see that coming. And basically, without him having to say it, God's people, or God's church, or God's followers, or those who profess to be Christians, are in fact the ones that are killing the image of God. Because if we profess to be Christians, then shouldn't we therefore be reflecting the same image of community, relationships, and what he had in the beginning? Because right now, we're so caught up in consumerism. We're so caught up about looking after self, and when we should be not only endorsing and living a life of selflessness, we're actually reflecting selfishness. And if there are any non-Christians, any of our non-Christian friends that see us doing these things and they see that we are no different to anybody else, then what's the point? And if the image of God is no good, then what's the point of following God himself? So there we had it. And then tonight, he starts touching on the three angels' message, the identity of the church. And I've never seen it presented this way before. I've never heard it presented this way. He touched on 2 Corinthians 4 verse 7. And he talked about how the heavenly treasures are in our earthen vessels. And he starts breaking down what an earthen vessel is, made out of clay. How vulnerable us humans are. We're really quite brittle, because when you go back to Genesis 2, you realize that we are actually made from the dust of the ground. And in fact, that is clay, And from the very day that we're conceived, we are brittle by nature. We are from moments that we've been growing up. We all have been experiencing things that have been slowly putting cracks into this brittle frame. And I'm not talking physical. I'm not talking physical cracks. Yeah, like I can see even the funny shape of my head. Physically everything's deteriorating, and I'm not as good looking as I used to be when I used to look like Justin Bieber and that, like all that's changing. But I'm not talking about those physical elements. I'm talking about emotional, psychological damage that's done to us. Some kids, they're born into families, not even born yet. They're in the tummy, and they're experiencing stress and anxiety because the mother's going through this, and possibly going through this because the father's not in the picture, or the father's abusing the mother. And then we've got kids brought up in homes that are broken and whatnot. And some of us have come through these type of homes. Some of us have experienced abuse, from relatives, from bullying, all types of these things. And all these things accumulate, and they become something that will eventually shatter the earthen vessel. And as he started putting this argument through, looking at the Bible, how it talks about body, mind, and soul. Quite often in the New Age movement, we like to separate these three components as if they're three different beings inside us, but it's not really. They are three different components with three separate functions, but they are interdependent of each other, because they are all relative. They all relate to each other. Without the mind and the soul and everything operating, it's there's really no way to move forward. And looking at the soul, talking about the psyche, the original translation of the word psyche, spirit, the spirit of a person. There's quite often we say it ourselves. We say, I'll be there in spirit. I'll be there in spirit. When we use those type of words, we are actually being serious about this thing that each human has to be able to connect on a spiritual level. Okay, it's not something it's intangible, but we have it. We have it there. It's been there. It's been made by creation. And when the damage is being done, and all of that slowly fading away, there's a reason why the image of God gets destroyed. It's all relative, man. He's building one upon the other, and just the way he's been presenting his sermons, the way he sets up his, it's like a skillful fighter, setting up his punches, setting up his jabs and whatever, ready for the major hit to take you down. I have a hunch what this guy's going to do at the end of the week is, I think he's going to lay down the hammer. Honestly, I think he's really going to lay down the hammer, because for those of us that have been had attended last night and tonight and Wednesday, Friday, I think we're in for we're in for a big eye opener, and I love the way he presents. For me personally, I like someone that keeps me thinking, keeping me on my toes. and connecting dots for me. It's really, really awesome. I don't like being spoon fed. You know, I want to be able to think for myself as well. You know, and praise God that He's doing that. And man, that thing tonight, He's given me so much to think about. You know, the connectedness of the mind, body, and soul, and the psyche. You know, why spiritually, you know, people always say, they use that line, you know, couples who pray together stay together. And there's something real powerful about that, because if each of us individually have a spiritual, I was about to use the word entity, but I don't want to confuse anybody, because like I said, they're not independent of each other. They have different functions, but they're all interdependent of each other. They need each other. You know, I mean, we this is our makeup. You know, this is our makeup. So what I'm trying to say is, if we have that inside us, this spiritual ability, you know, then if my wife has it, my kids have it, when we pray together as a family, we're actually connecting to each other on a spiritual level, in order that we can grab on to the Spirit of God. that's that's powerful. That's why family worship is so important, you know. And when I do that with my wife, it's something that we're doing, and so and doing that, we're spiritually becoming closer and closer together. Because if you were there last night, he starts talking about how what's happening today is, you know, we are strangers, people that go to church together, but we're just strangers to each other because we've never been to each other's homes. And then you've got husband and wives that are strangers to each other, and their kids, they don't even know what the kids have been up to and what they're about. Man, you don't even know what I'm talking about. You know, it's nearly 12 minutes. Just come to one of our meetings. All right, peace. I got to get some sleep.